and welcome to the Momversation Club, the podcast born out of the idea that every mum needs a tribe. I'm Claire Strong.
And I'm Christina Struckmeyer. We're two moms just like you, navigating the chaotic, challenging, and often isolating world of motherhood.
Now, it's said that it takes a village to raise a child, but we want to know, where the F is that village?
It's a question that resonates with so many of us who find ourselves raising children, managing careers, all while trying to maintain our own identities, often with a sense of isolation.
But we're here to remind you that you're not alone. The Momversation Club is your village, a place where you feel understood, appreciated, and supported.
We believe that by sharing our experiences, successes, and struggles, we can create a virtual village for all you amazing mamas out there.
So join us every week for honest, raw, and relatable discussions about all aspects of being a mum, including the stuff you just can't talk about to anyone else.
So if you've ever asked yourself, where the F is the village, then you found your tribe. So let's get into it.
We are so excited today, Christina, because we have our very first guest. Welcome, Jokotifa Alaye to the Momversation Club.
Thank you. I'm so honored to be guest number one. That's very exciting.
Well, the honor is all ours. We're so excited to have you. And you just have the coolest, if not most unusual job. So let me get this right. So you are I have my notes here, a death doula with a focus on grief.
Yes, ma'am. That is what I'm repping here today.
Oh my gosh. Right.
Oh, love that.
Let's just get into it. What on earth is that? Explain to us what the heck you do.
Sure. So I'm going to say that a death doula is a new-ish term, but you know what a death doula is because it's the person that comes and helps you during a transition. Let's talk about birth doulas, right?
Yes.
That's very topical.
So we all know that. We all know we're familiar with doulas in a birthing sense. I've never ever heard of a death doula.
Yeah, and so it's just on the opposite end of the spectrum, right? So it's still a time of big transition, a big life change, needing support, right? Same as a birth doula. It's just on the other end of life. And so a death doula can look like many things. The definition that you would find if you looked it up is a non-medical professional that assists people at the end of a life, whether it's the person or a family, a person dying or their family. Mm-hmm. But because it's sort of new and very unregulated, people can call themselves, in most places, people could call themselves one with no training. And I think that people are naturally death doulas anyway. But there's just now starting to be different certifications for it. So you can go find a couple different places where you could go and get certified and hang something on your wall that says you're a death doula. I say that I have a grief focus because due to my career, because I do have a job outside of what I'm doing here, it's difficult for me to actually help people when they're dying, when they're active transitioning. And so what I'm trying to do is educate people outside of that on how to navigate grief and loss. And as a person who's worked in death care for over 25 years, like I think I'm on 26 now, I've just, my life has been helping people navigate the end of a life and what does that transition look like going into the next phase. And it's usually around having a funeral or helping people decide what to do with their person. But through that, I've watched people grieve and what it looks like to grieve in a healthy way and what it looks like to be stuck in your grief, what it looks like to have good support, what it looks like to have bad support. And my passion in life is to bring education to people before they meet with a funeral home. That's really it.
Okay, so I think we need to just rewind a little bit because what is your day job? Because you've alluded to it there, but it's very connected to what you're doing in this capacity, isn't it?
That's how we know each other, actually. So she's our first guest, but we know each other through my ambassador work with United Way, which is a nonprofit, and she has a lot of stuff for the North State in California. So I'll let her go ahead and talk about that.
So we'll just say that I've been working in death care since I was 18. So right out of high school, I went to mortuary college. I started working in mortuaries and accruing licenses. And so I am a funeral professional, meaning I'm a funeral director, embalmer, crematory manager, cemetery. Like I do all of the facets of funeral service.
So before you got into this, you were interacting with people in a way where you were seeing them at that stage. And so you weren't able to quite dive into like the actual facets of that grief, even though you were able to see it from afar. So what got you motivated to really like push into that space and start helping people hands-on?
Yeah. 2020, right, where everyone's like reevaluating their lives and like what is my meaning? Yes. What is my purpose? If the world is ending, am I happy with how I've lived my life so far? And I'm grateful for the foundation that I had in funeral care, but in that position, I can only do so much. And there's so much conversations that could happen before that. You know, I never want people to come to the funeral home with no education, not knowing what to do, making emotional decisions. Like, I never want that for you. I want everybody to, it's going to be hard no matter what, but I want people to walk in with an understanding so we can have a level playing field, right? And you can ask for what you need and get what you need. But yeah, like this, I saw the way that people also are grieving. Well, we are not good as Americans, I'm going to say particularly, not good at grieving, not good at handling loss. We don't involve our children so much in death and dying. It's a really like separate from our day-to-day lives, and we put it over there.
Yeah.
Like, you funeral home handle it, like just, and we don't talk about it in ways that are open. We're very much like, shove it down, go back to work, right? And that's not healthy.
Yeah.
And then I saw the way that there's grief is now, it always was, but it's now inseparable from our lives and the lives of our children after a pandemic that changed our lives so dramatically. Whether or not we lost people, we got lonelier, we got separated from our communities. Like, there's just so much, we fought with one another, just like so much stuff got churned up.
Yeah.
And I looked at that and said, we are going to need help grieving now more than ever. And so how can I apply what I learned with death and dying to everything, to every loss, to acknowledge and work with ourselves and our children and growing up with so much loss as a foundational piece of our lives now, you know?
Wow. I mean, it really is amazing work that you're doing. It's just fascinating, and it sounds like there was a real need for it too. I'm just wondering, because obviously this is a mum podcast, and the people that listen to us are mums. How have you worked with parents and mums in particular when it comes to grief? What kind of situations do you find that your help is needed?
Well, right, I would say in this moment, it's more about me giving information that I've collected over the years where people haven't come to me for help, right? I've just sort of been in a position to maybe serve moms who has lost children, right? So I did listen to your podcast, and Christina talked about, loss and the things that people say and that's a part of it too, and that's a part. And oftentimes I will say, like, as funeral professionals too, most of us will say the hardest time that we have is when it's a young person that dies, whether it's a stillborn or a baby or youth or whatever it is. Like, those are the hardest times that even we have as funeral professionals, when even we need like a little more support than we might need when it's a 90-year-old lived a full life. Like, that's a little less difficult to navigate.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier that grief, the way we handle it, specifically as Americans. No offense, Claire.
Well, maybe us handle it tremendously well.
You're fantastic. Yes.
I don't think any of us do.
No. That's the thing is, when it hits you, I think a lot of people don't know what to do because they aren't raised to navigate that feeling and that concept. It is something that we kind of push forward, especially as mothers. There's a notion that you wipe your mascara and you carry on. Keep calm, carry on. I'll bring some of the Brit in. So how do you suggest we kind of shift that for people? Like, how how are you empowering the next generation to kind of learn more from our parenting? Like, what can we do as mothers?
Yeah. Well, so you're doing it already by talking about it, right? And I think I made that even comment is like, what makes a difference is us saying it. And also people who have experienced grief, and this is happening a lot, I'm noticing. So I'm in the Instagram algorithm of loss, right? And so everyone's Instagram feed looks very different, right? And it's kind of shocking depending on like who you are and what you're
really
into,
is.
what you see. And mine, if you look in mine, it's all loss. So whether it's other death doulas or other funeral people, it's also people documenting their experience. And so there is actually the shift of people really speaking about what it's like to lose a child, what it's like to lose a spouse, what it's like to lose parents, what it's like to have a special needs person in their lives that creates grief around that. There's just like there's a lot of willingness now to share, and I think that's important. I also think it's important for us to then share the things that don't work. Right. So I love that. Of like, if you're going to start a phrase with at least, just stop. Like, I love that. Yeah, just stop. But, and God bless those people. Most of them are saying things with good intentions. And I think about, I got called out. I don't know maybe I'll call it myself. So once I met a deaf lady and I think I just blurted out, "Oh, you don't look deaf." And she's like, "What does that even mean?" Right. And she's like, got sick of it. And then I like sat and thought about it, and really upset me that I'd been so stupid. But then I went back to her and I was like, I sat and thought about it, and I was like, I think it's a tick. You know, people are just like in a moment, they hear something that is like jarred their perception. They say the first thing that comes to their mind, and then sit down, and they're like, well, that was terrible.
How powerful that you went back and you said, "Hey, I misspoke here. I didn't, I didn't speak in the way that I meant, and here's what I actually meant." So talking about it and then being okay with like messing up and coming back to the fold here.
Yeah, and so I think there's two parts, right? So we as grievers need to say, what you said just there, nah, like, please don't, like, say something, don't say nothing, don't say anything, just give me a hug, like, say what you need. And so there's a balance of saying what you need, but also forgiving the person for saying something that wasn't good, as long as they take it, right? If they are like, I'm sorry, like, because we don't want to punish people for showing up. Because if we do that, if they say the wrong thing and then we get mad at them, that might shut them down forever. And now they'll never try it. They'll never try again. Right. And so now that the person who said something won't say anything, and that's another problem. Right. So there's a little bit of, and it's hard in the moment when you're grieving to give other people grace. Sometimes you just don't want to. But
so do you give advice to both sides, basically? So you give advice to the person who is grieving, to the person who may be in the case of a pregnancy loss or a mother who has lost a child. So you're there to support the mother, but you're also there to provide support to maybe the wider family on how they should handle the grieving person. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely fair. Yes, and so like on my Instagram, I have a little highlights of tips for grievers, and then I have things not to say, like ways to support people who are grieving. So yes, I want to speak to both sides, and I hear you talk about community, and yes. I'm doing the same, right? And so my intention is to build. You're just really hitting it when you're like, where's your village, where's your community? And we need them. We need a community. If we don't have one, we are not functional. I want to build a community where people feel safe specifically to grieve, to bring their grief, where people they know will be in a space and have a language base to like hear and receive, and maybe not, you have a better opportunity of like not hitting someone who's going to say something wrong. But also where you're willing to come to receive grief too. So it has to be a balance. I'm coming to get support, and now I'm in a good space. My bucket is full. I'm able to like give back. Right. And so my ultimate goal is to build a community of empowered grievers who intend to save the world by living well and dying better. That's my personal.
That's all. That's amazing.
Just a little task. I think
You
that's
know,
Oh,
amazing,
man.
what else are you going to do with your
Jokotifa.
life? Might
Well,
as well.
I think it's amazing, and I think it's desperately needed. So thank you for doing this. One thing I wanted to chat with you about. So we're talking about, you know, actual mourning someone who has passed, but you don't just help people with that aspect, do you? It could be other parts of grieving, not necessarily that someone has died. Talk to us about that.
So I like to say that there is grief in any loss, and that is from something that feels silly to something that you're grateful that you've lost, like a bad relationship or drugs and alcohol, or, you know, whatever it is. But if you're missing something, if something that was took up space in your life is gone, there is now a hole, right? And we sort of feel often that we can't acknowledge that hole, like, just forget it. And I press back to say, no, like, that's real, and you should honor that feeling. Not the more we like squash down feelings that are natural, the more the less regulated we are as people, right? And so welcome that feeling of loss, acknowledge it. What are you learning from that loss? What are you taking with you? And so like, I wrote a workbook that helps you in particular write a funeral for a part of yourself you're wanting to let go. And so in my mind, it's
Oh,
regarding behaviors that you recognize in your life that aren't serving you. So whether it's cigarettes or alcohol or food or bad relationships, whatever it is, like, what's the life cycle? Where did you start, like, leaning on that thing? What good feelings did it give you? Because it gave you good feelings. And, like, to pretend that never happened is not true, right? So what are the good feelings? But where are there better ways to get those feelings? And what is the why that makes it so important for you to separate yourself intentionally from that behavior and focus on a new behavior? And then, like, have a funeral for that part of yourself. Like, like that, we have funerals to acknowledge something, to have a ritual that says goodbye. So I make it easy for you. I write it out during the workbook. You fill out different sections, and then you take everything that you wrote, plug it into a funeral, and you just sit and you have your own little funeral for whatever it is that you're trying to let go.
So you literally have a funeral. You have this written out for people, so people can mourn the loss of whatever it may be, even though it's not a physical person or a thing. My gosh, wow. That's incredible. I've never, I mean, I may be ignorant to this, but I've never heard anything like that. I've never heard about this approach, but it makes total sense. And the one thing I'm really hearing over and over again when I'm listening to you talk is that it's about validating people's feelings. What they're feeling is valid. It's valid because they're feeling it and it's happening to
Because they're
them.
feeling it. Because it's real.
Exactly.
Because it's happening.
Yeah.
And you feel it. And you also have these things. And you have these, like, everybody. I mean, grief is one of those things that everybody is experiencing. You know, everybody. And so that's where that save the world bit comes in. Like, when we can get to the humanity of another person that feels lost like we feel lost, they become more than whatever it is that we don't like about them. You know, they become a person who has similar, like, who has feelings that we have.
I love that. And I love what you said about community, because that's what we're all about here, is building this like virtual village of women and parents and caregivers that, you know, are all going through this thing, and we all have these common experiences, but no one's talking about the hard shit. And I think that the idea of like pushing down and moving forward is really, really common. And even though, you know, back in the day, there used to be this kind of like actual physical village of people around you that would help you caregive and take care of the children and the adults in your family. Even though we don't have that, it's like you said, online, people are being more brave. I don't think I've ever heard stories of like the miscarriage and stillborns and women talking about grieving loss of identity and shifts in motherhood. Like, there's just so much information being poured out, and even though there's not that physical village around that person, there are people that are finding that and like pulling that in as part of their makeshift village that we're trying to do in this new crazy world. So I love what you said there. And I love that you've got a space for those people that feel safe and where, like Claire said, they can feel validated and heard, because that's a huge thing. We often feel things and we go, oh, no, not me. I'm fine. Like, I don't need all of that extra stuff.
Yeah.
And that's a classic mom situation, right?
It is. Yeah, it totally is. And one thing that I sometimes feel guilty for, because I think, oh, don't be silly, just enjoy this stage. But I do feel in some way grief for other stages of my girl's childhood that I kind of, obviously at the time, looking back, I really enjoyed and I really loved. And I grieve for the time that they were ages 5 and 7, because maybe in the moment it wasn't as great as it sounds to me right now. But I've said to Christina before, I often dream about my kids who are now teenagers, and every time I dream about them, they are always at those ages 5 and 7. And I actually go as far as to recall this glamping holiday I took them on, and it's very vivid. My dream is very vivid, but I feel kind of sad that we're not in that time anymore and we're not in that moment. But then I push, like you just said, I push my feelings down. It's like, oh, it's silly. You need to be appreciative of the moment that you're in now, and everything moves on, and that's just life. But I still feel a little sad.
Yeah, well, I think a part of appreciating the moment is saying, like, I feel sad that my kids have grown up and I miss my babies. Like, that's acknowledging the moment also. It's not saying, you're not dismissing what they are now. You're just like, I am sad in this moment. And that's like,
and that's okay. That's okay. Yeah.
It's okay.
Yeah. Right. So my child, I'll say my son, a week from tomorrow is turning 13.
Oh,
and
yeah, similar. So I have a 13-year-old too. So yeah.
And the phone is doing the things, where it's like memories and it's sending all these pictures, and I'm like, and I absolutely miss like having a baby and the cute little baby teeth and it's different. It's different. I love him. Like, I don't wish, he didn't grow up, but I miss my baby also.
Yeah.
So I'm in that stage as well. We're going into that teenage stage and we're losing our babies. Christina, savor every moment. You have a toddler still.
I know. Yeah, I feel like I'm holding her sometimes, and I'm like, I'm gonna miss this so much. Let me just like click my eyes to make it like a camera or something, so I don't ever forget this. It's so hard being a mama. Like, you constantly have that, but. I love what we're talking about, and I love that we're bringing this into our podcast, because I've dealt with grief, and I've shared that on this podcast, both with the miscarriages this year and also with the passing of my father. And something I'm doing as a mom, not just with grief, but kind of with everything, is I'm going, what belongs to me as a mother in this space of, the way I was raised is one way. And the way I want to parent is a different way. And what are the good things about what I was raised with that I want to bring to the kids? But what are some things that I want to shift and that they get different versions of that? And one of those things is open conversations about grief. It is open conversations about your body and like lack of shame. There's a lot of things that I bring in, but I'm not perfect. So I love what you said about going back and fixing things. One of the ways I grieve is I always quickly jump into anger. That is a big one for me. It's my most accessed feeling. And it's important for mothers specifically, but kind of everyone, to be able to go, hey, I was really angry, and actually this is what that was about, and it's part of my grieving process. And so can you talk a little bit about that? Because I know you probably encounter quite a bit of anger, because that is one of the stages of grief.
Yeah, so it is. I challenge everyone to look at the moments that they are angry and find the grief that is causing it. Because I think in many situations, there's going to be some sort of something or fear or something. Like, I think anger is, anger is so powerful. And it's another way that I want to help people is by encouraging people when they are faced with an angry person to realize that there's something else driving the anger, most likely. And yes, it's an absolute manifestation of grief. And what can be challenging. So you mentioned stages of grief, and there's 5 that we hear about regularly: anger, denial, acceptance, bargaining, and I forget the other one. But here's the thing, like it's a handy way to talk about grief, but there are no, I start at this stage and then I go to this stage. There's no linear, and those are a small spectrum of the emotions you may feel. So grief is going to look the way it looks. And another thing I try to share with people is, let's say you're grieving the loss of a parent and your siblings, right? And you're like, same mom, same experience, but you're angry and you're depressed and you're moving on and you're like wishing never, like everyone's going to have a different, you're not all be angry at the same time. You're not going to all be sad, like crying at the same time. You're not all going to be handling stuff at the same time. And so it's recognizing that people experience grief different, even if it's the same person that you're grieving. And I had a conversation with a friend recently who's navigating that. She was like, can't we all just be sad at the same time? No, like, no. That's
it would be helpful. Maybe we could all watch an episode of This Is Us or something, get us all on the same wavelength.
Yeah. Good point. You could totally pitch that to your group.
Jokotifa, in your professional experience, which stage of grief would you say people struggle with the most? Which is the hardest stage of grief, would you say?
I think it's too personal. It's too personal to what you're experiencing. And I would say also sometimes we just try not to feel it. We have a feeling that's uncomfortable and we just try not to feel it and do something else. I will say that there are different terms for grief manifesting in different ways. And there is at some point, so there's, let's say, complicated grief. Complicated grief would be compounded by other things. So let's say you didn't just lose a parent, but you lost a parent who had been abusive, right? And so you've got that, I never had this parent as the parent I wanted, and I've lost them, and I have feelings about both of those things at the same time. So it's complicated by other factors. That's just one way. There's anticipatory grief, where you know something's going to happen, right? And so it could be your parents are elderly or you're in the hospitalized or something, or like I use the example even of my dog right now. There's a lot of that. My dog is like 16. She is not doing well at all. And like, I'm like, one day, I've had this dog forever, and I just know one day I'm going to look and she's not going to be there. And I'm just like, and that's, there's a type of grief for that.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that it's so wonderful that you're available to people all the time, because people don't go through the grief stage where they actually are reaching out for help, if ever, but like at a linear situation. Like, I'm feeling grief for my dad's passing 2 years later, stronger than it was the first 6 months he passed. And it's so strange how that happens. But I think it's like you said, people, you push it down because you don't want to be uncomfortable. You want to be able to keep moving, keep going, especially if there are things to do. Like, I found a lot of peace in the fact that there were so many moving pieces to solve after his passing. Oh my gosh, where's mom going to go? Oh my gosh, what's the bills going to do? Oh my gosh, this, and oh my gosh, that. And I was able to put my energy into solving problems. As moms do, right? Mothers tend to like push that in. But then after everything was said and done and people took a deep breath and everybody else was starting to kind of feel a little bit better, it was like this big crash. And it's so wonderful to have a resource that you can go to, even if it's been 2-3 years or 5 years or 10 years, because you just don't know when that grief's really going to hit, and you need that space.
Yeah. And you never do forever, it could be 5 years. You could be grieving now and you're getting a lot of it out. And then 5 years later, something happens and, you're right back in it. And that is just what happens loving people or having people in your life,
I know that everyone grieves differently. It's a very personal experience, but if you could share a couple of your top tips, if that's even the right thing to say about this, with people who may be in that grieving process right now, what would you say to help them get through that?
I think storytelling is a really powerful tool. So I think finding, if you can, finding people to share stories about, if we're talking about a person. So if we're talking about a person, find people who be willing to listen to you tell stories. And if you don't have people, write it out, right? Maybe for, your family later on. So I find that to be really beneficial. If I'm going to soapbox it for a second, have an end of life event. People hate the word funeral, and I understand, like, we have not, as funeral professionals, necessarily made funerals anything anyone wants to go to, and so we've got this sort of shift to celebration of life. But some people are saying, like, just don't have any, like, just throw me whatever. Like people are very like, I don't want it. Da da da. I challenge that, because we have funerals for a reason, and it is to be with the people in solidarity. It's to be with community. It is to be in a space that welcomes grief. It is to be in a place with storytelling. So have an event, and a funeral can be anything you can imagine, including like a picnic at a park. It doesn't have to be sitting in a chapel. So I'm not telling you go sit in a chapel. I'm telling you, have a thing to ritualize and be in your community, so you can all be together having this experience. I would say make time in your life to feel it. Do not feel like, I understand, like, as a parent and having a career and doing this side project and managing out, like, all the things, like, it's so easy to find the things that are urgent to take care of. But and the grief is like, you want it to not be urgent, but if you don't acknowledge it, it will just come out later. It needs to be acknowledged. So however you can acknowledge, make space for, I don't care if it's 5 minutes, go sit in the bathroom on the toilet, and instead of scrolling Instagram, be sad. Like,
I was just going to say that these little pockets. So I had similar, like, so for some tangibles of things that worked for me during that space, car drives. Like being able to drive, obviously, like, don't sob and like be dangerous with your car driving, but listening to songs that my dad liked and driving around really helped me have a space of where to put it, because my kids were at home. I was able to be alone in the car. I was able to stop and pull over and cry if I needed to. It was away from everyone in a way that I could come back and talk about it when I had calmed down. Showers. I did a lot of sobbing in the shower.
Yeah.
But like, these little pockets of like, I need to feel this, because if I don't, that tension, that feeling of needing to cry is going to come out at some point. And if you hold on to it long enough, it can kind of be explosive by the time it does come out. So those are some tangibles that worked for me. But I mean, do you have any client experiences of things that were like working for them as mothers or people that were really, really busy, that like, because I always talk about, you guys need to have some me time for moms, and they laugh me out of the room. They're like, okay. And so, yeah.
Those are perfect examples. And it can't be all or nothing. It shouldn't be all or nothing. You can't, well, I would hope that people won't think that because I don't feel like I can grieve right or enough, that I shouldn't feel it at all. Right. But I think those are great examples. I think shower, I think driving, I think going shopping, I think just, I honestly feel like little moments in the car are like saving our lives as parents right now.
Yeah.
But I also, I have a little, practice. I have a freebie up on my Instagram that anyone can download, and it has a little 5-minute, reflection. And you basically pick up a stone, you sort of meditate on what's making you feel grief right now, and then set it down, right? And just like the tangibleness of it. And so if you download that, it'll walk you through what that might look like. And so I just challenge anyone, find 5 minutes. And it may not be all you need. You may need more, but it's something, right? And your things like to be acknowledged. Like, feelings want to be acknowledged. And if they're not acknowledged, they just get bigger until you can't not acknowledge them.
So, Jokotifa, I want to ask you something. So, so I'm a mom and I'm experiencing grief right now. You know, maybe I've lost a parent, like Christina, you were in that situation, or you still are, but you lost your dad a couple of years ago. Um, is it okay to display the whole stages of grief in front of your kids, or should you keep grief private from your kids in order not to traumatize them? Because I think that a lot of moms, and I've been in this situation, not that I've necessarily lost someone, but you know, I went through a divorce, so I was mourning the loss of that marriage, and it was when my kids were small, and I had a rule that I didn't want to break down in front of the girls because I needed to be strong and keep everything very normal and very settled, and so I saved my grief for when they were in bed at night. But was that the right thing to do in hindsight? Should I have been a little more open with it?
I'm not going to tell anyone what's the right thing to do because it's so nuanced. I am going to say if children don't see their parents grieve, they're going to think they're not allowed to grieve when they need to. And then we're just creating generations of people who who feel like it's not, I have to be strong and I cannot grieve because we are not, that's not an emotion that we feel, you know?
Yeah.
And so I think there are ways to do it, right? I mean, there are ways to do it. And I think, let's say, I think, let's say in the loss of a spouse, you know, a divorce situation, you know, I get like, also professionals, like there are therapists who will help you through this, right?
Yes.
I want to make sure I'm saying that because there's only so much that someone can do that's not trained, right? But I would say like it's okay to say, I would think, I'm sad for the loss of the life that I thought we were all going to have together, and sometimes like I'm going to cry about it because just because the relationship is over doesn't mean there wasn't great parts of the relationship that I will miss, and I want to and I'm sad that, you know, you don't have this or whatever it is. Like you have an honest but age appropriate conversation. And so you might talk to people who are more specifically know how to talk to children. And there are people out there who are
Yeah.
specific about how to have those conversations with children of like what's appropriate for their level, but also acknowledges that it's okay to feel sad, to make a decision that is the right decision that also creates sadness, right? And
Yeah.
I think that I think that with losing a family member too, I think that there's a lot of people who are afraid to bring their kids like to funerals, maybe because there'll be an open casket and they don't want their kids to see a deceased person. I think that we carry that because of whatever experience we had as kids. And if we had a positive experience where we saw someone that we cared about, that helps us have a more holistic, a more whole view of what it looks like to live. And what it looks like to live is that people will die, and people we love that will die, and old people in our lives will die, you know. And I definitely recommend with kids and death and dying not using euphemisms.
Yes.
As in like don't say, if you can, like grandpa's sleeping, because then they might then be afraid to sleep. If I go to sleep, will I be in a box and get cremated? You know, like whatever it is.
So true. Well, we talked a little bit about this on our episode about autism, but for my daughter, you cannot do euphemisms at all because she doesn't understand that at all. So it had to be very concrete. And the way we explained it is some people get very, very sick and there is no doctors or people that can help them at that point. And they do they do die. And, you're safe. You're not unhealthy. You're not going to die. And we said passed away, but die. But grandpa was very, very sick. And that's why. And he was in the hospital for a long time. Not everyone who goes into a hospital dies. A lot of people go to hospitals and they have babies or they get their arm fixed. We have to go over all of those concepts because children are so black and white sometimes.
Yeah.
And it can be super confusing. But I think talking to your kids is so huge. You mentioned like not talking about it creates this like feeling of I forget what you said, but you said something about like not speaking to them about it is problematic. And I think that that's true for a lot of things. I know for our family, we're working on showing fair fights. Because me and my spouse are human beings and we get into arguments sometimes. I know, right? But
How shocking.
but we have two different situations where I grew up with a lot of like very intense in your face kind of arguments. And my husband grew up in a family where they didn't really argue in front of him. They went for like nightly walks and argued on their walks. So he had this concept of like nobody ever fought. And so because of those two juxtapositions, like we have very different fighting styles. And I'm like, I want our kids to know it's okay to disagree and it's okay to fight. And there's a loving way to do that. So we do something similar with grief. Like we both, my husband and I lost our fathers. He lost his father in 2018. I lost mine in 2021. We have pictures of the grandpas on the mantle and we talk about them. We say things like, oh, that's Papa Joe. Papa Joe was really funny. He used to love to read. You love to read, Stella. And we'll share things that are in commonalities with Papa Joe. But it's our way of saying this person still lives in our memory, even though they're gone. You can be grieving forever. Like it's okay if you're sad that grandpa, is gone. That's all right. We can talk about it as a family. And we don't typically break down in front of them. But now that you've shared that, I'm wondering if there's a way to be sad. But I just wanted to share that experience of like, there's two opposites ways where you're like, Claire, you're like, I don't want to like stream crying like against the floor, like, have that slow slide down the wall, like, dramatic thing. But like, but you also don't want to be so strong that your children are afraid to be weak and are afraid to show weakness when actually that's just human. That's not weakness.
Yeah. And even shift it to like that word vulnerability, right? Instead of weakness. Weakness has like bad connotation, but if you vulnerability. is a powerful tool and also something that people resonate when they see it in one another, right? And so when they see you being vulnerable, they have permission to be vulnerable also. And I think I just think about how flexibility in our life makes life a little easier. The more we're willing to like bend in whatever we're dealing with, like, just that's a good way to be, right?
Totally.
Mind, body, soul, flexible is good, right? And so being vulnerable means we're not, we're just a little like, we can be whatever it is we need to be.
I love it. Let's be a little bendier. Hey, Jokotifa, I've got to ask you one last thing before we let you go. Your job is very full on. I can imagine that it's so intense and you're dealing with so many big emotions and so much sadness because a lot of the people that you work with are in full on grief mode. Where do you get your support? Where do you go to have a bit of a break for you?
I do think there's this sense of different people are built to do different things, right? And there are things I was not built to do. And this happens to be the thing that I was built to do. And I think I am able to see in many situations the grief and the loss and the beauty and the wholeness and the blessings that come that gives me juice, I guess, right? I know that to lose a person is not all sad. It creates sadness, but there's so much more. There's so many other layers. So, and then some of the work I do specifically is informs the way that people handle death and dying, and informs the way that they are able to see the beautiful parts of it. And so that certainly brings me, I mean, sometimes just like joy and happiness, like for real, like, and then specifically I do some very specific things that help people. And it's just like to give that to somebody, to give people the gift of that, making that experience something great in the midst of it also being sad. Like it's priceless. But sometimes it's heavy. So, meditation and weightlifting sometimes. It depends on what I'm doing. I have a pretty heavy spiritual practice, which is actually where the name came from. And has not always been the case. I'll say that too. That's for another day. So, I have a thing, and I have a really great husband. I've been married for 21, 22 years. I don't know.
Oh my gosh! Wow! Congratulations!
Yeah, that's amazing. Congratulations.
he's really like through whatever I brought to the table, he's been like, all right,
we're in this.
I guess what we're doing today.
He sounds like a keeper for sure. Oh my gosh. Jokotifa, where can, if people are listening to this, watching this, and they really want to find out a little more, where can they follow you? Tell us where they can, reach you out.
Yeah, the best place right now is Instagram at Mourning Space, MOURNING space. That's my at in most places, but Instagram's really where I am primarily. I'm building a Patreon on nights and weekends, right? So between all of the things that I have to do, it's on the list, but I have some competing priorities in this moment. So eventually Patreon, but freebies in the Instagram, so find them there. I got the website Mourning Space, also mourningspace.com.
We are so happy to have you on. I think that just speaking about this topic, the work that you do on Instagram and the clips that you share and all of the great education that you're providing is so valuable to this world. So thank you for doing what you do. And we are so happy to have you on as our first guest.
We are, and you have set the bar pretty high. So future guests, check out this episode. You got to be as good as this.
Well, thank you. And I'm grateful for what you're doing, too, because there is an epidemic of loneliness if you haven't talked about that yet. So
that's a good one. We need to perhaps delve into that a little bit deeper. But yeah, there sure is. Yeah. And we appreciate everything you're doing. So thank you so much for being on the Momversation Club.
All right. You're welcome.
And that brings us to the end of another episode of the Momversation Club.
And if you've enjoyed today's show, please don't forget to subscribe, like, and leave a review. Your support helps us reach even more moms and build a stronger village.
It sure does. And remember, we're here for you. And together, I promise, we'll figure out where the F is that village at.
See you next time.
Bye.